I'm Anisha Tank. You're watching the Global Common channel for the Singapore FinTech Festival 2020. Now, SAARC and ASEAN, emerging economic epicenters and SME powerhouses in the making? That's the question. There could be 2 billion opportunities out there. That is the subject of the next session. And we have a highly energizing panel. They're probably energized too. They'll discuss the changing world order and the emergence of the SAARC and ASEAN sub-regions as economic powers. So here to moderate the panel is Andrew Work, director of the Lion Rock Institute, and joining him, Cesar Purisima, who is Asia Fellow at the Milken Institute, Hsia, who is Assistant Chief Executive of Infocomm Media Development Authority, Selim Hussain, Chief Executive Officer at Bangladesh's BRAC Bank, and Anupam Verma, who is the Chief Executive of Singapore and Regional Head for Southeast Asia at ICICI Bank. We'll go now to Andrew and his panel for the discussion around opportunities for SAARC and ASEAN.
And hello, and welcome to the SAARC and ASEAN Emerging Economic Entrepreneurs at SME Powerhouses. 2 billion opportunities in the making. Whether you just logged in or whether you've been watching all day long, on behalf of the Singapore FinTech Festival, I'd like to welcome you to our session and tell you that we're in for a really big one. So strap yourselves in and get ready to go. I've got 4 big panelists that I want to introduce to you now. And I'm going to run through the introductions, and then we're going to give them a chance to bring you their introductory remarks. So I'm going to give the home court advantage to the first person I'd like to introduce, and that is Hsia, who is the Assistant Chief Executive with the Infocomm Media Development Authority of Singapore. And what is that all about? They're making deep investments in digital infrastructure, innovation, and inclusion. So they want to do that through building stronger global collaboration and norms around the world. And she is the right person for the job because she's a career diplomat who, previous to this job, was Singapore's High Commissioner to the UK, based in London, also ambassador to Ireland and Iceland at the same time. So clearly at the top of Singapore's diplomatic corps, and really the right person to do this. So really exciting stuff. She is going to be joined in today's panel by Cesar Purisima. He is an Asia Fellow with the Milken Institute. And I founded a think tank. And I tell you, when people in think tanks talk about think tanks, the Milken Institute is recognized as one of the top in the world. He's also created a Pan-Asian private equity path, and he sits on the board of like anybody and anything that matters, whether it's in the NGO sector, like the World Wildlife Fund of the Philippines, in education, like Villa Sal University and the International School in Manila, but also great Philippine brand names that everybody knows and loves, like Jollibee Foods, Ayala Land, and then some global outfits, including the AIA Group. Now, it's probably only fitting because that he has this level because he was the Secretary of Finance in the Philippines under President Benigno Aquino III. And so really a great person to have on this panel to discuss this topic today. We've also got, from the banking sector, we've got Anupam Verma. He's the Chief Executive for Singapore, and he's also the Regional Head for Southeast Asia for ICICI Bank. Which, of course, is out of India, and he's a lifer. He joined them in 1999 as a management graduate from the famous IIIE out of India. And he moved from corporate banking to become what we call a client banker, which is quite special. And it means that he was responsible for coverage and delivering solutions across commercial banking, treasury, investment banking products. I mean, most people, they just focus on the sector, but he's focused on the client. But he also does some work in the community in Singapore as well, working with the Singapore Indian Development Association, and that gets him up close and personal, even with high school, secondary students, and working as a mentor with young people, which I think is really great to see people taking part and getting involved in the community. We also welcome today Selim Hussain, who's the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer from BRAC Bank. And he only joined them in 2015, but since then, he has taken them right to the top of their sector in Bangladesh. And they've become a real standard bearer for corporate governance and something called value-based banking. And they apply that across all the different companies that are part of the group across the broader enterprise. And they're in some really interesting stuff like mobile financial services. They've got a local software development company as part of their portfolio. They've got a UK company that is doing remittances, stock brokerage. I mean, it's really an interesting collection of companies that they brought together. But at the heart of it is this concept of values-based banking. And Selim's a convert to that cause. And I'm going to let him open up our opening comments today. Selim, welcome to the panel. Really excited to have you on. Value-based banking, maybe you can tell us a little bit about that and also touch on our big topic of the day, SAARC and ASEAN and SMEs. Take it away.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for having me on this program. Values-based banking is essentially a focus on what we call on people, on the environment, the planet, and on prosperity for all our stakeholders. What that means is that for somebody like BRAC Bank, which is a publicly listed company, approximately 20 years old bank, while we have a strong focus on values for the shareholder, there is an equally strong focus on development goals as well. And that also stems from the fact that we are owned by 44% of the bank is owned by the largest development organization in the world, the NGO called BRAC. But that's all about values-based banking. But what I'd like to focus on, Andrew, is the SME sector in Bangladesh. When you talk about Bangladesh, most people think of Bangladesh as a country with a very large population on a very small piece of land, which particularly in the 70s, 80s, and 90s suffered very significant climate, poverty, health, development-related challenges. And that's all very true. But over the last 15 or 20 years, things have changed quite dramatically. And Bangladesh has grown at 6% plus GDP growth rates for the last 15 years. They have achieved very significant success in terms of the Millennium and the Sustainable Development Goals. And very importantly, the CMSME sector, which is our pride and very much our DNA in BRAC Bank, that has emerged as a very important driver to this growth. And these organizations, these SME organizations, as we call them, ranging from micro merchants to agro-processing to ready-made garments to manufacturing institutions, organizations, these now comprise almost 30% of GDP, 90% plus of civilian employment. The CMSME sector is an absolutely key driver for the government's overarching goals of accelerating employment and growth, reducing inequality and poverty. And we're very proud in BRAC Bank to have almost 53 to 54% as of today of all our customer assets in this particular sector, which I should also add is not exactly very popular with the general banking sector in Bangladesh, which tends to focus on the larger corporate and commercial businesses. Thanks very much, Andrew.
Hey, thank you very much. And I'm impressed to hear those kind of stats. I remember talking to a banker in Hong Kong once, and she wanted to reach out to talk about SMEs. I was running a chamber of commerce. I said, what do you mean by SMEs? She goes, oh, well, at least $10 million. I'm like, Hong Kong dollars? She goes, oh, no, US dollars. I said, revenue? She goes, oh, no, profit. We mean at least 10 million US dollars profit a year. Like, we're really focused on small business. I kind of lost my mind. Somebody who really understands this sector, understands trade, and of course really had to think hard about SMEs when he was the Minister of Finance for the Philippines is Mr. Cesar Purisima. Again, I'm so jealous of the Milken Institute. Maybe I'll get to do some work with them someday. But Cesar, can you please give us some of your thoughts?
Thank you, Andrew, and good evening to my fellow panelists and the audience. I've been locked down at home for the past 9 months. The Philippines having one of the most stringent social sequestration programs since the pandemic. The silver lining, though, of the lockdowns is that we've been all forced to become more digital. And that's what happened to the banking sector. I spoke to a president of a bank in the Philippines, and he said his estimate is over 5 years' work of digitalization had to be fast-tracked for them to be able to service their customers properly. And that's the silver lining. It's not the CEO, CTO, or CFO that's driven it. It's the pandemic at an expensive cost to us, of course. Now, if you look at the numbers, for example, in the Philippines, ATM withdrawals has dropped 30%, check payments have dropped 70%. Our InstaPay, which is the central bank's electronic interbank transfer service, jumped 400%. And the PesoNet, also the central bank for interbank transfer service, also increased by over 100 and 143% in volume. GCash, which is the digital wallet of one of the telcos in the Philippines, has seen 1,000% increase. And Union Bank, which is one of the traditional banks in the Philippines, that is the leader in fintech, has seen user sign-ups of over 2,700% increase year on year. So that has shown you that people have to adapt, and the banks also have to adapt if they wanted to keep their customers. Now, how will this impact SMEs in the Philippines? Before the pandemic, the numbers, I think, is similar across ASEAN. In the Philippines, they account for over 90% of entities. They account for 2/3 of the employment, over 67%, and they account for about 40% of GDP. But of credit, they account for only 8% of credit. So there is a massive credit gap when it comes to SMEs. And I think digitalization can help in addressing or solving this credit gap. First, by making it least lower cost to service them, because one of the challenges is the transactions are smaller and the cost is higher. No? Absence of credit information, and therefore alternative credit data using AI and analysis of alternative data sources can provide additional information pathways for banks to grant credit. There's also the opportunity to give them better access to information. For example, an SME in southern Philippines before had a very small market, but with access to internet, access to e-commerce, suddenly the market is not just their small town, it becomes the whole Philippines and even a wider region. So here, I think is a major opportunity to really make a major leap in improving the economies of the region. ASEAN-wide, the SMEs account for over 50% of employment and about 40% of GDP. And if you run across the different ASEAN countries, it's a very similar statistic. So therefore, we really need to focus on digitalization to help SMEs and also accelerate ASEAN integration. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I hear what you're saying. It sounds like necessity is the mother of invention, and certainly it sounds like the business people in the Philippines have really gone digital in a big way using fintech. And I'm glad to hear that fintech banks and Filipino fintech companies are there for them. I met the chairman of Union Bank at the Singapore Fintech Festival a couple of years ago, was blown away with the work they was doing. Really impressive. So from our friends in ASEAN, we're going to, we're going to look a little bit at SAARC and hear from our other two speakers. Although, Anupam, you're from India, which is part of the SAARC, but you're in Singapore, where you're running the ICICI bank operations for Singapore and Southeast Asia. What's your take on what we're talking about here today?
Yeah, hi. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all of you. It's a pleasure and honor to be here. Talking about the SMEs in India, I believe this is the beginning of a golden decade. India is likely to benefit from shifts in global supply chains, and we will also see more and more MNCs setting up knowledge-based in-house captives in India. On top of that, the domestic customers are getting used to e-commerce and the on-demand delivery, which will lead to more and more onshoring. So actually, all this put together, this is a great news for SMEs. However, for SMEs to ride this wave, they will have to go on a path for their own digital transformation. This would mean use of technology tools, ranging from creating an electronic record of their business, like digital payments from customers or to suppliers, use of software for accounting, tax reporting, payroll, and so on and so forth. On top of that, I think the transformation would also entail creating a digital presence in terms of getting plugged into a B2B or a B2C online platform, and as a result, have a hybrid model. All this put together will help SMEs remain competitive, expand their customer base, optimize cost, and get access to timely and cheaper finance. So what's happening in India right now is that industries and businesses are now operating within large ecosystems and they are taking advantage of interconnected set of services to fulfill customer needs. Example, health, education, travel and hospitality, and B2C marketplaces. So SMEs will benefit immensely if they embed themselves into such ecosystems. As an ingredient, I think a key requirement for SMEs would be to have a digital identity, be it in terms of eKYC, goods and services tax return, bank statement, credit bureau data, income tax return, and their past behavior and the track record within their ecosystem, be it, let's say, a large corporate like Unilever, or if they are with Amazon or Paytm. Now, combination of all these data sets is being used by banks to assess and disburse credit real time in a seamless and paperless manner. So the implication of all this is very, very positive for SMEs who were earlier unfunded or underfunded due to lack of collateral. So going forward, their digital identity and their digital footprint will act in a big way as a collateral.
Yeah, and it's great if they can get have that kind of identity online, which has maybe been a barrier to getting credit in the past. So thank you very much for bringing that in. And I'm sure we're going to come back to that topic because it is super interesting, and we're going to try to squeeze it into the 40 minutes that we have. We'd like to hear from Ms. Hsia. Ms. Fu, I feel, as a former High Commissioner to the UK, I'm wondering, is there another title I should be using? I should be Your Excellency or something along those lines? Yeah, we're just going to get your microphone live, and that'll make it a little easier for us to hear you. That'd be great. But you were also ambassador at Ireland and Iceland, so I guess I can call you Ambassador Fu because I know people hold that title for life. So
yeah, well, we don't hold our title for life, so Cesar will be perfect. And thank you so much, Andrew, and my fellow panelists, and good evening to everyone who is tuning in from Singapore. But of course, as Anupam mentioned, it could be good morning and good afternoon to people from all over the world. Now that I'm with IMDA, which is really the agency responsible for, in some ways, architecting Singapore's digital future, we play both a regulatory role as well as a development role in the digitalization space. And what I thought I would share this evening is really what we have been doing in Singapore in the digitalization of SMEs, the kind of support we have been giving, and then move on a little bit to what we do within Southeast Asia, the 10 economies of Southeast Asia that Cesar has already mentioned a little bit. And then maybe from there, talk really about what we are hoping to do in terms of some global initiatives and platforms that we are providing. So starting with Singapore, I think people might be surprised to know that we actually have 99% of our enterprises are SMEs. They provide 2/3 of our employment and about 50% of our GDP. So in many ways, if you look at the shape of our economy, it's almost like a thumbtack, which means a very broad base that provides a significant amount of employment and a decent amount of GDP as well, and a very small percentage of large local enterprises or multinational companies that provide the rest. Which means that as a very globally connected city-state, the reality is that we have compressed what is otherwise in much larger countries, an ecosystem that necessitates that in order for Singapore to remain competitive, to increase our productivity, the SME sector is what we really need to invest very significantly on. And IMDA, way before the pandemic, has put in significant programs to help our SME go digital. So we literally call it SME Go Digital, that was launched a couple of years ago. What it does is to provide a whole suite of pre-curated, market-proven, reliable kind of digital resources, from very basic foundational ones of human resource management, payroll, to getting access to cybersecurity, which is of course very important, and offering that with a certain amount of grants in order to encourage a higher adoption of digital solutions. That's the very basic level that we provide, but we also have different tiers. Given the size of Singapore's economy, clearly most companies, in order to be competitive, need to go global. So we have the scheme where SMEs, growth SMEs go global. And then we offer a much higher suite of digital solutions in a similar format, but kind of categorized according to your industry sector, somewhat more curated based on the level of your development and the ability to reach out to a broader international market, whether it's B2C or B2B, without necessarily having a physical presence around the world. And we have also a national e-invoicing scheme where we adopt actually a pan-European standards called PayPal Authority. And how we drive adoption, apart from the grants that we've been giving, is to use the government procurement really to require e-invoicing as a result of that as a very large market from the government. Companies then adopt the e-invoicing. And when I get to what we are doing regionally and globally, we will fit that picture together of what we are doing in Singapore. So now that we have been hit by COVID, we have a fortunate of a significant base of SMEs who are already digitalized. But we all also know that in a pandemic recovery phase, what we see is really a K-shaped recovery. Those who are digitalized actually do a lot better. And those who are not actually do much worse. And so you have an unfortunate case of a greater divergence between the digital and non-digital. And I think what we are now trying to do is really to smoothen the K, kind of make it perhaps a little closer to a C. And you know, the immediate response of the government is to provide a huge relief support measure, which is about 20% of our GDP. And clearly that has to be very targeted, not just to individuals who have been most affected, but significant companies that are most affected, which means these are the companies that have very high touch. And we also need to transform the economy in creating the skills for our companies and our workers to be able to further digitalize in the post-pandemic recovery phase. And I would then mention kind of two sectors which perhaps might be interesting. Those of you who have visited Singapore or live in Singapore would know that one of our greatest pride and joy is the Singapore hawker food. We have a lot of kind of street food hawkers all across Singapore. And this is the sector, of course, that was most affected. It's all about congregating lots of people, sharing your food, having great conversations. And in what would be called the lockdown period for the rest of the world, what we call circuit breaker, clearly the hawkers have been most affected. And what we then tried to do is to use this opportunity to provide hawkers go digital, a system where they could use kind of contactless system in e-payment. We created a solution, which is a unified QR code that can accept e-payments from 19 different e-payment systems. Consumers could just use a QR code to make payment. And again, support schemes are given to the hawkers in order to convert to the e-payment system. On the other side is really about seniors. And I think that's the huge challenge when we all go digital. We can communicate on video conference, do your phone calls and others. But the older people who tend to want to spend their time together found it challenging. So we then have a Seniors Go Digital program that help them use these communication skills, but more importantly, to be able to use many of the digital solutions, whether government services or e-payment system, digital banking, such that they are not excluded from this drive as well. So those are, I think, two very important policies that we put in place in order to bring greater inclusion for our society. So moving on to what we are doing from Singapore to ASEAN. Similarly, I think this is something that we have been paying a lot of attention to, given the potential of ASEAN. There's a report that suggested that we will triple our digital economy in the next 5 years, which of course represents a very strong trajectory. But really, that really comes from a very low base of untapped potential. The ASEAN only has about kind of 7% of the GDP that is digital. well, if you compare that to China, it's about 16%. In Europe, it's about 27%. In the US, it's 35%. So the reason why ASEAN is able to grow so fast is because we are really starting from a very low base. And what we really need to do is to help more ASEAN companies on board into digital platforms. And once you kind of cross border, what you really need to do is to have the harmonization of the rules and regulations so that companies, especially small and medium enterprises, have the ability to onboard these digital solutions across borders quite easily. And that's when I talk about the invoicing system that we have adopted, we are hoping that the rest of ASEAN and some of our like-minded partners like Australia and New Zealand would use a similar platform. So once the SME adopts that platform, you could instantly use it in the countries that you're likely to be trading with. So we have done quite a lot of harmonization work in ASEAN. We hope to be able to do more work in terms of data privacy and others, because at the end of the day, you really need to be able to transfer data as well.
Yeah.
So that's ASEAN, but let me just finish with some kind of global work that we are doing. That ideally, of course, you want it to be done through the WTO, through some of the work we are doing. We are also doing it with like-minded partners. But what we have also provided are two platforms. A platform that has just been launched at the Singapore FinTech Festival called Prexplora, which is really a platform to connect SMEs across the world. And the second is what we call Trade Trust, which allows for digitalization of documents and allow for SMEs to better assess some of these digital solutions again. So I will stop there, and I think you would like to get into Q&A for us to get into greater depth in some of these issues that I have raised. Thank you.
There's a lot of moving parts there to check in with, and we are getting questions from the audience. I've got it here, and I'm going to come to some of those lately. I've got some names here, and so people don't worry. We will get to your questions if you're watching this from home or your office or wherever. But you talked about a lot of different programs that Singapore is doing. The one thing that really caught my ear was like you tell people, businesses in Singapore, if you want to do business with us, you got to be on the platform. We're not sending you money unless you go digital. It's like, woof. That's that's some tough love, but I'm sure it moves a lot of people across the line. I'm kind of interested to hear what the banks are doing to help their customers to come in, because Selim talked about this. Anupam, I'm sure you guys are doing something, but this is really tough, especially for small businesses, old businesses, especially, with all due respect, if they're run by older people, it can be really hard to get them across the line in different places. And I wonder if Selim or Anupam, have you guys been working in this area to help bring these companies across the line?
Yes, thanks. Andrew, I have to say, even in Bangladesh, which is a country which is just about to graduate from an LDC status to a more of a developing country status, you see, what has changed is that customer behavior has been changed by this pandemic. That is the one positive outcome. The fact that, as Mr. Cesar mentioned earlier, that 3 to 5 years worth of acceleration in terms of the digitalization agenda across an economy has now been compressed into a very short period of time. The customer behavior has changed. They want different things in a different way. At least the channel has changed completely. And you, as a supplier, as a business, if you are not able to respond to that change, whether you're a financial institution or you're a retailer or you're a hawker on the street, you're not going to survive. So, and very interestingly, we found that even demographics, 15% of BRAC banks' customer deposits are from what we call senior citizens.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And 6 times more senior citizens are now being onboarded in the last 4 or 5 months onto online solutions than was the case in 2019. So that change is not necessarily restricted to under 30s or under 40s. It's happening across demographics in society, and it is happening to people in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, who incidentally are very important customers for banks such as ours. So it is absolutely incumbent upon institutions, organizations, banks, particularly the sector I come from, to immediately respond. If you haven't started earlier, you need to get into a digitalization journey. You need to plan out what you want to do and need to be able to do in a couple of years' time. And you better start investing quickly, because I do believe that even in countries like Bangladesh, in 2 to 3 years' time, many institutions, certainly financial institutions, will die if they are not able to adapt to this change. Finding ways to broaden, deepen access for customers to either deposit products or credit products, new geographies, new customer segments. If you are not able to do that and at a very effective, efficient price, then your institution is not going to survive very long.
And it's really interesting. Yeah, really interesting what you're saying about the older demographic getting online, because if you serve that demographic, it's all been about, creating, still having to have physical spaces for them, designed for them. But now if they're going online, it might finally push those SMEs to follow them. Anupam, I know you guys at ICICI, I expect you've been doing some work in this sector to help SMEs get online. What's the story there?
Yeah, so let me give a couple of examples on how banks as well as government is working together, including our bank. So if you look at today in India, a startup can open an account instantaneously at the time of incorporation. For example, ICICI Bank has integrated its API with the Ministry of Corporate Affairs portal. So the importance of ease of onboarding a new business or a startup is clearly driving these integrations. And now a startup can be open for business from day one. The goods and services tax network in India is another enabler which provides granular insights into the functioning of SME. And now it's a key real-time input in the credit underwriting for banks. And same goes for individual and commercial credit bureau data. And all these data sets are integrated via API to make the underwriting process real-time, seamless, and paperless. In fact, in India, one will soon have an architecture where the SME can use account aggregators, who will have access to all the business data, bank statements, and GST return. And with the SME's consent, all that data can be shared with lenders to make a real-time credit assessment, and disbursement of loan can be done in a matter of seconds. This will democratize SME credit, as they will be able to choose the best offer. And we will also be there as one of the banks, on that platform.
Sure.
On top of that, I think government and private sector partnerships can also play a big role in providing business support infrastructure for technology adoption. For example, ICICI Bank has a SME platform called BizCircle, which has more than 100,000 connections, and it is used by our SME clients for all their needs beyond banking. It could be finding partners, new vendors, IT support services, networking, knowledge sharing, and skilling. And last but not the least, I think Proxtera in Singapore is a great example in that direction. Proxtera will act as a connector of platforms from different countries, and this can be a game changer for SMEs, as this will give them access to cross-border e-commerce and open up new markets. I think when SMEs look at going beyond the shores, trust becomes very, very important, and Proxtera can play a crucial role in building this trust through technology across counterparties.
Okay, I mean, these are great programs and they're working, but I mean, maybe Cesar, I got a question here that comes from one of our people, and they want to know, how can that work? These are all great in-country projects, but you were a minister of trade, and then you were a minister of finance for a long time, and I guess you really had to think about building the international connections so that SMEs could work together across borders. You talked about the innovation that's been driven in the Philippines, but I mean, once you've kind of crossed that line, how do you then, what can be done at the supranational level? Countries working together, and I mean, I'll let you have a couple of words, because I know Hsia is also thinking about that every day. But Cesar, why don't you kick us off on that?
Well, first, the sad situation right now is that the COVID pandemic has really hit the bottom of the pyramid. And the bottom of the pyramid is mainly the SMEs, especially in the service sector. They have very limited capital, very limited liquidity, very little assets. And therefore, the thrust of government intervention really is to keep them above water. No?
Yeah.
In fact, the monetary authorities have been flooding the capital markets with liquidity. But unfortunately, the target of that liquidity is the one that's not getting it because their credit quality has deteriorated as a result of the economic situation. In fact, in the Philippines now, the central bank has told banks that lending to SMEs will become part of your reserve, compliance with reserve requirement. In fact, there's a law that requires a certain percentage of borrowings or lending to SMEs. No? And therefore, digitalization cannot really meet its potential unless you have a more holistic approach to the situation. In the case of Philippines, and I guess similar countries situated like the Philippines, we have 4 key challenges. No? One is connectivity. 2 is limited adoption of digital payments. 3 is expensive and prohibitive logistics. And 4, the overall business environment. In the case of the Philippines, about 33% still do not have access to internet. In this day and age, I think access to the internet must be looked at as a human right, as similar to electricity and access to potable water. No? And I think it is incumbent upon countries to really work with the private sector to improve access to that. Not just access, but better quality access and lower cost access. Unfortunately for us in the Philippines, among the ASEAN 6 countries, based on various indices, we are unfortunately the lowest. No? Because, for example, when it comes to infrastructure, our tower penetration is much lower than our neighboring countries. Our ratio right now is one tower to almost 5,000 users, whereas in Vietnam, which is started later than us, they have 1 to 711. So it has to be a more holistic solution. On digital payments, we should follow, for example, the lead that India did, which required digital IDs. Now, we still don't have universal adoption of digital IDs, and I can go on and on about the problems with digital payments. Logistics cost is also quite high, a combination of regulations as well as infrastructure issue. And then in the business environment area, it's a complex problem of government still doing things manually, ease of doing business, et cetera, et cetera. And therefore, if we really want to make sure that digitalization can achieve its potential of empowering SMEs, we must deal with those 4 key challenges. And if I take a broader picture on ASEAN, there are many things that we still need to do. One is harmonization. We need to harmonize standards, harmonize rules. We need to connect our system so that it's easy to move products from the Philippines to another country. National single window system is still not universally implemented across ASEAN. Imagine if we can, start with that. Then with one input, it's automatically recognized in the rest of ASEAN. But clearly, digitalization is the way to go if we want to help SMEs, out of this pandemic.
Okay. Well, I do want to recognize we had more questions coming in about EKYC and digital identity helping to get access to credit, and about how supply chain disruption has given new opportunities in the region. But we are out of time. So I think we're going to have to take a lot of these big issues that we identified in this discussion, and we're going to have to bring it to Singapore FinTech Festival 2021. When I think, Hsia, you're going to invite us all to Singapore. Am I right?
Physically as well. Yes. Yeah. Hopefully you can all come physically to Singapore.
Absolutely. I've been to the Singapore FinTech Festival a couple of times. It's absolutely one of the best events on the planet. I'm really honored to have been invited to moderate this session. A big thank you once again to Ms. Hsia, Assistant Chief Executive of the Infocomm Media Development Authority in Singapore, Cesar Purisima, the Asian Fellow for the Milken Institute, Anupam Verma, Chief Executive Singapore and Regional Head of Southeast Asia, ICICI Bank, and Mr. Selim Hussain, the CEO of BRAC Bank. And we're out of time. Thank you very much. Singapore FinTech Festival 2020. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
Andrew, phenomenal timing. Thank you so much for that. What a great panel, so energized. I told you, right? But we'll definitely have more to look out for from the SAARC and ASEAN regions as the world economic powers continue to shift in order to find some balance.